Good morning and welcome to Three Fox Presents New Perspectives on New Challenges, discovering the value behind the disruption. My name is Toby Fox. I'm the Managing Director of Three Fox, the marketing agency for councils. And our job is to keep our network of councils and developers and investors and their influencers and advisors connected. We used to do that and love doing it at physical events, but during lockdown, we've been doing it through digital channels. And on this channel, Three Fox Presents, we provide bespoke webinars designed in collaboration with our clients. Today, we're with Willmott Dixon and guests to look at how savvy councils are responding to current and long-standing challenges. Local authorities are facing extreme demand for housing, with even greater pressure on social housing looming as the pandemic takes its economic toll. Meanwhile, they're balancing the destructive effects of COVID-19 on already weakened town centres with growing local spend in suburbs and commuter towns as people continue to work from home. And councils are grappling with these issues in highly disrupted markets where viability and value are even harder to quantify than normal. All of this while the financial pressures squeeze ever tighter. But some councils are finding a way through the disruption to deliver high quality homes with the security of knowing they have maximised affordable home ratios irrespective of market conditions. They're competing successfully with private developers for desirable sites. They exceed affordable compliance levels, even on sites perceived to be unviable. Some councils have seized the opportunity to understand development viability at no risk, to harness the capacity of local registered providers and to develop at scale without costly staff expansion. And some councils have retained control over land assets, over town centre revival plans, and over the direction of development so that growth adapts to changing local needs. Our aim here today is, on the one hand, to share a bit of knowledge, some knowledge exchange with colleagues in the public sector who are watching today, and on the other, to share with developers and others in the audience how these responses can open up business opportunities. To achieve those aims, we couldn't ask for a better panel. It's a real pleasure to welcome to your screens the brilliant Barbara Brownlee, Chief Executive of Westminster Builds. A change of plan means that, unfortunately, we won't have the pleasure of Councillor Dominic Beck's company this morning, but every cloud has a silver lining, and it's your lucky day, viewers, because you get to spend the next hour with Jane Davis, who's Head of Strategic Housing and Development at Rotherham Metropolitan Borough Council. And between Barbara and Jane, we've got enough talent and experience for any panel, but we've gone two better because we're also in the company of Councillor David Renard, who's leader at Swindon Council and chair of the LGA Environment, Economy, Housing and Transport Board, and Richard Sterling, National Head of Land and Development at Willmott Dixon Construction. So I'm going to spend the next 55 minutes in this august company quizzing them on our three themes of security and opportunity and control. And you can join in, viewers. You can use the Q&A to fuel the discussion. Bear in mind that the shortest questions are the easiest ones for us to respond to. If you'd rather share opinions with your fellow viewers, by all means, make use of the chat. And we've got a few polls to run as well, so you can contribute by responding to those when they pop up on your screens. So first, let's kick off the conversation with a question for Councillor Renard. David, how has Swindon Council delivered a scheme of 100% affordable homes? And are you operating with a unique set of circumstances and market conditions?
Thanks, Toby, and good morning, everybody. I think it'll be useful if I just outline the context that we're doing this in. So a number of Swindon's housing estates were developed after the war, and a number of people who were bombed out came and started new lives in Swindon. And a lot of those estates obviously now are 50, 60, 70 years old. And of course, they were built with very large amounts of open space, which of course is very welcome, and particularly post-COVID, something that people are looking for again. But what it did mean was that a number of the buildings in some of these areas were at the end of their life. But also we had some opportunities because of those original space standards in terms of public realm to develop some schemes. And this is the one I'm going to talk about this morning, is hopefully one of several that we're going to be able to bring forward. This particular site, and I'm delighted to say that we're working again with Willmott Dixon, who are fantastic partners and have delivered a number of things for us in the borough over the years. This particular site is on one of the main thoroughfares into town from the motorway. So we wanted a scheme that not only provided housing and low cost housing, but also was going to really look the part as people made their way in by car from the motorway into the town. So it's an important gateway site. So it was really important we got it right. So in terms of how we got it off the ground, we've been looking at this for a couple of years now, and of course it all starts with the money, doesn't it? So we needed a good financial model, and of course having really good management is important. And we're fortunate in Swindon that we still have our own housing stock and therefore a housing revenue account. We have set up a private development housing company as well, but on this particular scheme we've done it through the HRA. So in terms of the funding, and this in many ways was the most difficult part of it all, we've first of all used an underspend from our capital program, and we've also used some reserves in order to reduce our borrowing. But of course we're also reliant on grant funding from Homes England. And there was a lot of negotiation that took place in terms of balancing space standards with grant funding, and also looking at the mix of tenures within the scheme. And there's a very small amount of social rent in the scheme, basically because the numbers didn't add up if we'd have provided as much social rent in there as we wanted to. We've also used some of our right to buy receipts to contribute towards the scheme. Everybody's aware that you have a certain time limit in which to spend those, so this was a real opportunity for us to use those receipts to contribute to the scheme and replace some of the units that have been sold off through that scheme. Big advantage, of course, is it's council-owned land. I'm sure everybody's found that if you've only got your development partner and the council as the two people involved, it's far easier to get these schemes off the ground, whereas if you've got multiple landowners, it's far more challenging. So we did want to have a mixed tenure offer. There's some affordable rent. We've got some shared ownership. And as I said, that was all down to really how the financial model added up, because we were keen that we wanted to deliver this regeneration project with more housing, and that was the mix that we needed. We have had to clear some units away, but overall we wanted a net gain of units on this particular site as part of the regeneration. Strong political support, I think, is really important for these things. Certainly as the administration, we were very keen to deliver this. The Labour opposition were not so keen, on the basis they wanted it all to be social housing. But as I said, really the choice came down to, can we deliver a scheme with more and better housing, or do we deliver no scheme at all? And that really was the choice. And as the administration, we were keen to deliver this scheme, which is being built as we speak. And you can see from the picture behind me, it's well underway now.
And is that scheme addressing the sort of gaps, the needs that you have locally? Are you managing to plug a gap as a council?
Well, as a town, our percentage of social housing is actually one of the highest in the country. So we do have a very good offer in terms of social housing, and we've got a lot of privately owned units as well. So part of the rationale for this scheme was to give us a much broader mix of offer, so that those people who want to get on the housing ladder but can only afford shared ownership have got an opportunity here, and we're doing that shared ownership elsewhere in the borough as well, of course. And and then you've got affordable rent as well, which is below the market rent. So we did want to try and cater for all parts of the market. And of course, housing in Swindon compared with the rest of the south of England is actually very good value. If people want a good value place to live, do come and have a look at what we've got to offer. Obviously, the corporate council needs to be committed to it as well, and it went through all the normal governance arrangements. And it also fits in with the development programs that we have across the borough. We've been a growth area since the Second World War and continue to deliver significant numbers towards the country's housing need. As I touched on earlier on, there was a commitment to regenerating the area. Some of these areas now are looking very tired and run down, and this was an opportunity to regenerate part of one of those estates. We got a lot of support from local people, and we did an extensive consultation with the residents in the area. So there was broad support for it.
Yeah.
Of course, you need collaborative working across departments in council to make it work. We've got a good working relationship with the contractors. In this case, Willmott Dixon, as I said, very trusted partners with a great track record of delivering some really good projects for us in Swindon. So we're always delighted to work with Willmott Dixon. Of course, you've got to have a good working relationship with Homes England, who are providing part of the funding to make sure that the scheme gets off the ground. And as I said, that some of those conversations were a little bit challenging in terms of the balance between grant and space standards that we wanted to provide.
How much compromise did you have to make in order to secure that funding, David?
Well, the space standards of each of the residential units do meet the national minimum standards. I think we'd have liked to have made them a bit bigger. Of course, this scheme was conceived before COVID. I think we know that people now working from home are looking for larger space. So they're not as large as we would have liked to have made them, but looking at all the numbers and the grant funding we could get from Homes England meant that, again, it was a choice of, do we do something or do we do nothing? So we thought it was better to provide the units to the best possible standards we could within the financial envelope.
Great, thanks very much indeed.
I think that's all I need to say, Toby, but happy to take questions.
That's great. That's a really good little case study. Thank you, David. Jane, looking at that as a case study, does that sort of approach and that assembly of different ingredients, would that be solving problems in Rotherham as well? Could you plug gaps in similar ways, or are the ingredients needed different in your circumstances?
I think we've taken a quite similar approach to Swindon. We're also a stock retaining authority, and we've got decent HRA reserves. So we've brought forward a number of wholly affordable schemes through the housing revenue account with support from Homes England. Again, that relationship is key. I think, like David, we've brought in council shared ownership as well, and that's been a big move for us, because I suppose what Rotherham might not have in common with Swindon is in that there are areas where we don't necessarily want masses of social rent if we've already got a sufficient supply of affordable housing in the area. But shared ownership really does give that opportunity to give people a step on the ladder. On one site in Rawmarsh in the north of the borough, we assembled an old former derelict shopping centre using compulsory purchase order powers, and used grant and HRA to build 58 homes on there, and half of them were for shared ownership, and they've all sold pretty quickly. The rest are for rent, and I think those are other we're sort of replicating that model on other sites, making that work.
Just going to ask, and are you having to make some similar sort of compromises over the provision of social housing overall? That in order to secure the grant that you need, in order to make a project viable, you're just not able to provide the level of social housing that you'd like to overall, or are you finding ways to plug that gap too?
Yeah, I think we're performing well on affordable housing provision. We've got a high need for it in the borough, and we are able to, and we've not had to compromise on quality. We've sort of really stuck to our guns on space standards, that outdoor space, and we're increasingly working towards a decarbonisation agenda and looking at ways of making homes more energy efficient as well. Obviously that costs, so it does require a high level of council buy-in, political support and investment.
I'm just going to come back to David. We got an interesting question in from Mike Haravan, who's watching today. Mike's asking why you're not using for that project the council housing company that you have set up, David.
Well, this is an area of Swindon that has got very high numbers of council owned housing. And it made sense to finance it this way. The housing company that we set up, as many councils have over the last few years, is to deliver not only additional housing but additional income to the council to meet some of its general fund revenue pressures. So, but this particular scheme we thought was best financed through the HRA.
Fantastic, thanks, David. And Jane, under what conditions would you employ a housing company rather than delivering directly through HRA?
It's something that we have considered in the past, but as we've been able to deliver affordable housing through the HRA, we've sort of moved away from that. I think companies can be great. I think it's essential that you've got real clarity of purpose, you know, why you need the company and what you're delivering through it, and that you've got that demonstrable pipeline to make it worthwhile to set up. We've kind of taken a bit more of a blended approach. So we've got our own council delivery programme, which is increasing every year. We also really rely on our relationship with housing association partners. They play a really important part in delivering affordable housing. So in other cases, it's better for us to transfer land to them to build in exchange for council nomination rights. And also acquisitions as well can sometimes be a better route. It's not to say that we wouldn't still consider a company, but at the moment I think we've got the right approach to delivering against need. Although with the increasing challenges around decarbonisation and the need to deliver more potentially modern methods of construction homes, we will be looking at other models such as joint venture arrangements and potentially lease-back models. But we'd approach this on a site-by-site basis, looking at what the area needs and what's going to be the best way of bringing it forward.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Jane. Okay, Barbara, I've set it up. Well, you can pick out any of those threads that you like in terms of the different ingredients that need to kind of be in place in order to deliver the housing that local authorities need. But obviously, as the chief executive of a housing company, why would you employ the housing company rather than build direct?
Yeah, okay, perfect way in. I mean, in a way, I couldn't agree more with what's been said. Westminster has a very strong, very big HRA funded programme on its own land, delivering social housing. And, you know, that is absolutely crucial to part of most councils, I would think, development programmes. So we have that. And like, you know, Jane mentioned, it grows as you go through your estates, and it grows as you do your estate planning and your asset management, and you look at your land holdings more carefully. But the issue in Westminster is that we already have a large amount of social housing. You might not kind of realise that if you think of the centre of London, but about 25% of the borough is social housing. And unfortunately, the other 75% or 74.5% is extremely unaffordable housing. Yeah. So what the council sees its job as doing is plugging that gap in the middle. So we want affordable housing, which is outside the technical Section 106 definition of affordable housing, right? Not that sort of housing which is prescribed by planning and which is, you know, percentages of social and percentages of intermediate. That's pretty covered. What we want is a thing that we just call affordable in the ordinary human sense of the word affordable. So just sub-market, right? Sub-market. And that's what a local authority council company is very, very well placed to provide. I mean, historically, that stuff, as Jane mentioned, has been provided and sounds like, you know, it's still being provided in her borough through RPs. And RPs have been great providers of that. But in central London, RPs are leaving the development stage for quite a lot of reasons. I mean, it is so expensive to deliver in the middle of London. It is ferociously expensive. So any RP with stock there, you know, can usually find an asset management reason to not improve it, not invest in it, sell it, and build 3 or 4 things outside of London. And they are doing that in large numbers. And then equally, RP balance sheets have been hit by fire safety demands as much as anybody else's. You know, they're under huge pressure to maintain and improve their own stock around the changing demands post Grenfell. So within the centre of London, unlike I think the rest of the country, RPs are not developing at the rate. So the council have taken over that spot, that sweet spot in the middle of, you know, sale, outright sale, market sale, and really so lower income social housing. And that bit in the middle is where Westminster Builds comes in, and where Westminster City Council wants it to deliver some housing. Brilliant. So that's what we're doing.
Thanks, Barbara. We're going to come back to RPs in a second, and I'll come back to you, Jane and David, to comment on that. But first, let's bring Richard into the conversation. Richard, how are the private sector, how are you as an enabler having to adapt your business models to maximise affordable housing delivery with working with local authorities?
Thanks, Toby. Morning, everyone. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic, actually. And I think, actually, when you talk about this delivery beyond compliance and maximising affordable, I think it is absolutely achievable from both public and private sector in different ways. I think if you pick up on what all the fellow panelists have said, there's a couple of key ingredients for me. And I think what David, Jane and Barbara have all demonstrated is that political clarity and leadership. I think without that achieving beyond policy isn't really going to be achievable. And the point you just touched on there, Toby, is around flexibility in delivery models, and probably more so how returns are viewed around all that. So I think it's fair to say delivering a 100% affordable housing scheme for David, or an affordable scheme for Barbara and Jane. It's not looking at short-term commercial returns to pay for that. It's looking at that over a longer period of time. I think that's an important aspect of how delivery models need to change. And the other side of it is probably putting a bit more value on the social outcomes of what you're trying to achieve. So again, there is absolute inherent value in that. It's probably not just on a commercial appraisal at day one. And I think all of those aspects, local authorities are really well placed to drive that. But from a private sector perspective, I think we've got a key role to play in supporting that, and that can be in a number of ways, whether it's bringing skills and expertise to support it, or just looking at how we support councils in a slightly different way. At Willmott Dixon, we've recently launched our development solutions business, and that's really focused on providing an almost a development consultancy service to help councils keep that control and unlock development. It removes that layer of development profit if you're looking at a partnership approach, and it keeps it within the scheme. And being a contractor and providing that service, I think one of the key drivers for us is about how we can accelerate things to get to site, which I think is what everyone wants, but it's doing it in a viable manner. And there's numbers of different ways it can happen. We've heard from the panels there that we worked on another scheme with Bristol City Council, a scheme called Ashton Rise, and that's a scheme of 133 homes. And the council's real driver there was to maximise the delivery of true social housing. So not affordable rent or shared ownership, but true social housing. They wanted to do that without Homes England grant. So we worked with them to develop a cross-subsidy model, which used the principle of 60% of the homes being outright sale to fund 40% true social housing. Now, straight away, that's above policy compliance anyway. And it's developing a tenure of affordability that can be funded in a different way. We've done that by keeping the council in full control, so they've funded it through the HRA. Been really driven in terms of tailoring the mix and the type of units to meet local needs as opposed to pure commercial return. And it's enabled them to deliver beyond policy in a manner that can demonstrate to the market that it can happen in an area at Bristol. And we've got that's at one end with local authorities. Then we've got other examples. We've got a scheme at Durton Lane up in Preston, which is a site we bought from Homes England recently. That's a scheme of 250 homes, and we've done that in partnership with Trafford Housing Trust, a local housing association. And on that site, we're delivering 50% affordable housing with Trafford Housing Trust, and that's been achievable because THT are taking a longer-term view on the returns and actually focusing on the social purpose of the scheme. And And by taking that longer term view, though, not only have we delivered beyond policy there, but we're also developed a competitive land receipt, which has enabled us to secure the site from Homes England. So it just shows how it can be done in different ways. And I think the other side of it as well is particularly the role of local authorities and how, you know, the private sector can support that. It's not just about housing either. So I think there's a way in which we can use the principle of housing to deliver wider sort of social infrastructure, for want of a better phrase. You know, Barbara, the scheme where we've delivered with yourselves at Dudley House, which has seen housing help to fund the delivery of a new school. You know, examples like that. We did another one with Barbara in Westminster, which is Mobley Jubilee, where we use the principle of residential to fund the delivery of a new leisure centre. Yeah. So again, it's all delivered against social need, but just looking at it in slightly different ways and looking at the models and the commercial returns in a different way as well.
Great stuff, Richard. Thanks. We're going to come back to have a look at sort of wider town centre regions shortly. But first, let's just do a quick round the panel on what the private sector can bring. I mean, what else would you like the private sector to be doing to enable you to deliver beyond expectations in terms of affordable housing and social housing? David, is there anything that the private sector can bring to the table that you'd like to see?
Well, I think I can use an example of what we're doing in Swindon as actually something that not we want to see, we are actually doing. We've got a joint venture set up with Barrett David Wilson Homes to develop about 3,500 homes, again on council owned land to the south of the borough. And I have to say it's again an extremely productive relationship. We're now delivering a really fantastic place to live with good quality housing, and as a council we're equal partners. So both the developer and the council seek to, over the 15 to 20 year period of the development, to make an income from it. But we're also creating great places at the same time with affordable housing. So you know, I think if you find the right partner as a local authority, you can really do some fantastic things that will create really nice places to live for the long term.
Yeah, Jane, what would you like to see the private sector bringing to Rotherham?
I mean, I think they're already doing a great deal. We absolutely can't deliver it alone, and we need the private sector. And there's been some great examples of partnership working and where they've sort of jointly problem solved with us to bring affordable housing forward. I think what we need perhaps more of is private sector organisations that are willing to take that longer term strategic view rather than just short term commercial returns. You know, we've got an interest in the area and its overall direction. We need the private sector to perhaps understand more about the challenges we face at local authorities, around the right to buy specifically, around the absolute necessity of demonstrating best value, best consideration, that we've followed all of those transparent routes really clearly, and again just sort of being flexible and working with us on how to overcome some of those challenges and leave a longer term legacy.
Thanks, Jane. Right to buy is something that the audience is picking up on. I think all the questions in the Q&A at the moment are around that. And Barbara, is there anything you'd like to pick up in that?
Oh, I was going to answer your first question. I'm sorry about what we'd like to see from the private sector. And everybody's mentioned the long-term view, which I could not agree with more. I mean, that makes a vast difference. But for me, there's also something else about the whole carbon neutral and sustainability agenda now. It's really crucial. It should be top of our list. I think it is top of most people's list. As Jane said, it's extraordinarily expensive to deliver. And we are right at a point where developers are experimenting, where, you know, technical teams are looking at different ways of delivering stuff. And I think we've really got to get the private sector to assist with that, because there's a lot in there that local authorities are not best placed or can afford to do that experimental work themselves, you know, and it needs to be done because it's expensive to build in a sustainable manner. So I think that is a huge thing that the private sector could bring forward for us.
What about in terms of capacity? Let's move the conversation on a little bit. One of the things you're doing for Westminster is sort of augmenting the council's capacity to build. Are you better placed, do you feel, than a local authority to attract talent that's needed to come up with these sort of innovative ways of looking at development and delivery?
Okay, I hope we're augmenting. I mean, I used to run from inside the council the development programme, and it's huge in the council and now with Westminster Bills. So it is just an addition. It's to allow the council more freedom to deliver a range of tenures, sub-market, not just social, not just outright sale, and long-term rental, long-term sub-market rental models, which the council itself can't do. It's to allow funding in different ways, and it's to allow it in a place like Westminster to go outside of its boroughs. Westminster, it's just worth noting, is dependent on people being able to commute to work, and we really wanted to deliver sort of the standard of accommodation that Westminster City Council provides inside the borough, outside the borough, for people who want to come in. And that is about having a good landlord who will own the freehold, where who is your service charge provider is Westminster City Council. You can completely depend on it. You can depend on our quality, and you can have a reasonable rent to commute and move into the city and work in the city. So that's one of the other big reasons for us. But in terms of attracting talent, I don't know if, as an organisation, a company is any better at attracting talent than a council. I think what attracts talent is fabulous development programmes. What young people in the business who want to grow up in the development area, what they want to do is they want to work on innovative schemes, big schemes, iconic schemes that look to push boundaries, schemes that put people first, are very aware of our sustainability agenda. That's what they want to work on. And they want to grow and learn on that sort of scheme. And I think anybody who's got that type of attitude to development will attract good talent. A council, a private developer, or a company. That's what people want to work on. Meaningful, good schemes that they'll build their careers on.
David, are your schemes attractive enough and desirable enough to be bringing the talent in?
Yeah, I mean, the issue of skills and talent is a really big one, isn't it? And if we, as a country, are going to achieve the government's house building targets, we're going to need more people with more skills and the training courses to support that. I agree with Barbara. We need that variety, and we're fortunate enough in Swindon to have the headquarters of Nationwide Building Society, and we're working with them on an innovative scheme to develop some more housing, again in one of our more deprived areas. And if it's a successful piece of work, then they're looking to roll it out across the whole country. They're not actually, because they're not a private sector developer as such, they're not actually seeking to make a profit or a large profit. They're seeking to work with us to deliver some new opportunities for developing housing that can be afforded by those on lower incomes. So in terms of attracting skills, I think that's another example of what Barbara was saying of how people would want to come and get involved in that sort of thing. So.
Yeah. And of the different sort of private sector partners that are available, there are some interesting sectors that people might not have been looking into. What about this the carbon neutral agenda? What about the requirements to have the private sector help you deliver on that? Do you see a need there?
I certainly do, but we also need government to support this, again on the skills side, but also on the financing side. And in many ways, the easy bit is to make new properties carbon neutral. The really big challenge is to retrofit the existing stock of 28 odd million properties. And the LGA estimates that's about £1 million a year for the next 30 years in order to achieve that. So that's the big piece of work, the big prize. But without government strategy, funding, support on things like training, then we're not going to be able to achieve that.
And Jane, would you echo that?
I would, yes. And I think I'd just like to sort of agree with Barbara as well. I think we're not struggling to attract the talent and the people to deliver these ambitious programmes. But equally, it's important that we're sort of harnessing expertise from the private sector. So we place a big emphasis on engagement. We hold an annual developer summit where we bring everyone together and just sort of exchange and share ideas. And we're looking at different ways of procuring that help us to get on board with the developers at a much earlier stage in the process through, for example, pre-contract services agreements where we can work through and design the schemes rather than needing to have everything in-house at the council. We've got quite a lean client team really, and it is more about how we work with others, particularly on the climate change agenda. We're making use of the partnerships we've got. We're working with our repairs and maintenance contractors to develop solutions for retrofitting our existing 20,000 homes while also developing specifications for new build. So
yeah, smart stuff. Richard, we were lucky enough to be involved in the launch of Now or Never, the Willmott Dixon sustainability program, the net zero carbon commitments. What can you offer local authorities in terms of helping them to deliver that agenda?
I think there's a whole host of things from Willmott Dixon, but also a wider private sector perspective that we can bring to the table. You take from a Willmott Dixon perspective, I think first and foremost we work with a number of authorities throughout the country, so we've got that ability to bring a shared learning from whether it's Rotherham to Swindon, from Westminster to Rotherham. I think whilst I think local authorities do a great job of speaking with each other and sharing learning, I think as a company that work with those organisations on the detail, we're really well placed to make sure we share that learning. And I think there's a whole number of areas in as Willmott Dixon we're trying to support customers, and part of that is working with councils to use our expertise where they maybe either don't have it or just have a capacity challenge. The example I used at Ashton Rise was a great example of that, where we used our development expertise to help bring that scheme through. It might be looking at ways we can bring forward financial capacity. We're working with funding partners or different development partners. The example I used with Trafford Housing Trust before. But doing that in a manner that complements the resources that councils have got, and picking up on that aspect of sustainability, I think that's a particular area where we want to support. As you mentioned before, our Now or Never strategy, it's absolutely central to what Willmott Dixon's about. And we've invested significantly in a new business called Collider, which is really set up to deliver net zero or even passive house based platform products, and so it's using the principles of sustainability, harnessing our overall economies of scale nationally and doing that to make a cost effective and affordable solution across the board, but doing it in a manner that's not reinventing the wheel every time we sit down with a customer. And I think we can bring that principle of learning and expertise in sustainability in a number of other areas to support really, and I think that's across the private sector in its entirety.
Fair enough. Okay, we've got carbon neutral, we've got attracting talent and augmenting council capacity and resources. We've got all of those ingredients that are needed in order to achieve affordable home schemes beyond compliance. Those are all threads that I'm happy for you to continue to unravel as you see fit. We've also got an interesting question in from an anonymous attendee, which is always slightly ominous, but they're asking if legal obligations on local authorities to secure best consideration for land act as an impediment on delivering the maximum amount of affordable housing. David, where would you stand on that, on that sort of that concept of best consideration? And obviously there are changes in the pipeline to that coming through with the construction playbook and the green paper on procurement.
Yeah, absolutely. As the question rightly says, we as councils have a legal obligation to be satisfied that the council officers are putting proposals before us that have secured best value. That can be a constraint. And if we take the example I was just giving of Nationwide working on a particular site in one of our more deprived areas, there was a debate around how much the land was really worth. And if you get to a market valuer, they will tell you it's worth a particular figure. But actually, if you can't get a developer in to develop that particular site, then you could argue it's not actually worth anything at all. So I think there are some discussions to be had and some ways around it. So we on that particular site, we didn't secure the amount of money that from Nationwide that we were told the land was worth. But then in the absence of any other interested parties who wanted to buy the land and develop it, I think we could honestly put hand on heart and say we secured best value, and ultimately we're getting a lot of housing for those people on low incomes as a result of it, and so that there's clearly some social value there as well.
Great, thanks, David. Barbara, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to just add something that seems to be coming up in the questions as well, which is about what is really affordable. Yeah, because there's a big point being made, and I agree with the people on the chat that, genuinely speaking, if you take grant funding, and it's the same in the GLA as it is, I believe, in the HC outside London, affordable means 80% of market rent. The joy of having a local housing company, I would say, is affordable can mean absolutely what you want it to mean. And I think it was David, I think, in his very opening speeches, remarks, that said something about his shared ownership helping people get on a ladder of ownership, and that being really important for Swindon. And that is massively important in Westminster as well. And whilst we can't do shared ownership in Westminster, right, land values, which we've just been talking about, are such that you'd be able to sell about 0.5%, right, to make anything in any way feel even vaguely affordable. It's ridiculous. Home buy doesn't work in Westminster. You can't get below, at the starting level that you need for home buy. We can't build a flat, at that level. What we can do is absolutely bring our rents in the company right down to kind of 10% above social, 20%, 50%, and do a ladder of affordability on that basis, on sub-market rent. So I would just like to say, for Westminster Builds, affordable rent really does mean a lot less than 80% of market. We're right down to 40-50% of market on one of our big schemes, Ebury, where we're modelling the viability and we're playing around with a percentage, a small percentage to sell, very small percentage of market rent, and then flexing the rents in the rest of the commercial bit of the scheme, right? Not the Section 106 part, which stands at exactly policy compliant, not the council housing and and the pegged affordable, but the commercial side of the scheme. We are bringing the rents right down to a long way below 80% of market, and that's what a company can do, because like any other company, we have a business plan, right? And what you have to do is make that financially viable and work on your business plan for that scheme, accounted to invest particularly heavily if you have your own development company, and really take control of yourself of what affordable means in your area.
Jane, the ladder of affordability, how does that apply in Rotherham? Are you sensing here that there's an argument for working through a housing company?
I think it's absolutely necessary in the scenario Barbara described. I think Rotherham is very different. It's got a very different housing market and economy to Westminster. We've got areas where 80% of private rent is very, very close to the social rent for an equivalent property. So different set of challenges. I think, with shared ownership, which is working in Rotherham, we have shown that we can develop that ourselves as a council, and we've also gone beyond first-time buyer markets to develop some older people shared ownership apartments as well. They're trying to sort of provide that other offer for people to downsize, which is a real pressing area in Rotherham, not alone in having an ageing population and needing more of those opportunities. Can I just quickly nip back to the best consideration?
Yeah, of course.
Question as well. I think it's important to note that while clearly as a local authority we do have to be very open and transparent, we can't just do deals without having properly tested the market and provided that sort of level playing field. Best consideration, best value doesn't necessarily mean the highest capital receipt that someone will pay for land. We can take into account a much rounder suite of arguments. We can look at whether this is going to bring forward a higher quality development, whether it's going to meet particular strategic needs for the authority, whether it's going to bring forward housing quicker than we otherwise would have done. It's not just about the land receipt, it's about all of the wider offer, the social value, if strategic needs can be met for scheme can be brought forward more quickly. All of that has a value, and it can all be taken into account.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's widen the conversation a little bit as well. And before I do that, actually, I made a promise. We were talking at the beginning of this event in the rehearsals about the great backdrops you and Barbara have. And I promised to mention that Barbara's pictures all come from her gallery that she's curating. And we're going to put in the chat, we're going to put a link to that gallery. So viewers, you too could have a backdrop as glamorous as these. But while that's going into the chat, Jane, let's talk a little bit about the town centres. Let's expand the conversation to town centres. You've got real commercial restraints in housing that you've described, but the same applies commercially in the town centre. How are you successfully curating your town centre, and how applicable do you think your approach is to other local authorities elsewhere?
Okay, thanks, Toby. Well, I'll just start with a bit of information about Rotherham, as David did about Swindon. And I've got a couple of images that I think might be helpful. Like many town centres, Rotherham's been impacted by the general move from physical to online retail, and that's been amplified by the pandemic. And as you can see from this map, we're already dealing with that challenge because looking at the diagram on the right, we've got two successful out-of-town shopping centres at Parkgate and Meadowhall that have really impacted on Rotherham's sort of identity as a retail centre. But what that map also shows, I think, is the potential of the town centre that we're very well aware of. It's in a really central location in the Sheffield City region. We've got a river and a canal going through the town, fantastic park, and we're close to the advanced manufacturing park, which is where we've got firms such as Boeing and McLaren creating thousands of jobs for that sort of high-end technology. And we really see Rotherham as the town centre as being a brilliant place for people to live, to sort of match that job creation. We're really trying to sort of articulate that through our master plan. Because of these assets and opportunities, we've got a clear master plan to transform the town. And that's absolutely clear, having that vision that everybody's signed up to across the council, but beyond as well, and engaging with partners in the business sector. I think I just want to show a couple of images from the master plan and some of the projects that we're delivering before I move on to housing. So the master plan is very much focused on leisure development, residential development, and fantastic public realm schemes to knit it all together. But I wanted to just point out that we're not giving up on retail. We're not trying to compete with the out-of-town shopping centres, but through our high street, we're trying to provide a real sort of niche and independent offer that complements that. And that's a running theme. We're not trying to compete with the private sector. We're trying to bring something different through. Another of these pictures shows the tram train system, which is the first in Europe, and that links Rotherham to Sheffield in a matter of minutes. And we've also got our first university campus in the town as well. So a lot going on, a lot's already happened. And then the next slide just shows the current projects that we're on with. The Forge Island scheme is absolutely critical to our master plan. This is a large area of land between the train station and the town centre where the council's assembled a site, and to control that regeneration, we're working with Muse to build a cinema, hotel, various bars and restaurants. And then my final slide just sort of shows the housing ambition and development that we've got going on in the town centre. Our master plan shows that we can deliver 2,000 new homes. And we're making a great start with Willmott Dixon, building 171 homes well underway now. So we're building a mix of shared ownership, homes for sale and council rent homes. Some of those are apartments, some of those are family housing along the riverfront. And we're doing that through, again, heavy council HRA investment, but with significant grant support from the Sheffield City region and Homes England as well, to bring forward that mix. Around 3/4 of the scheme is affordable housing. And I think it's important to note that we're not trying to compete with the private sector. We're trying to demonstrate confidence in bringing forward some of the more difficult sites, which will then lay the ground, demonstrate that confidence, and bring forward developments on some of the less challenging sites. So, for example, one of them is a former swimming bath site that's now a council-run surface car park. We decided to deal with contamination, raise the levels a few metres above flood level, and build 72 homes on there, as I said, with Willmott Dixon. And that's not because it's the easiest thing to do. The private sector wouldn't have touched a site like that. But by investing and demonstrating that confidence, bringing forward a significant number of new homes at the same time as the Forge Island cinema and other projects, we can really kind of just sort of generate that critical mass and that momentum. And it's that longer term approach that's needed. If I could just sort of mention a couple of key things. We can't do this alone. It's really important that we engage with the business sector, which we regularly do on the other opportunities that are available in the town centre. And that master plan is absolutely key. Everything follows from that. And it helps you to create a really strategic vision that then helps us to attract in the investment and grant support from partners at Homes England and Sheffield City region.
Thanks, Jane. You mentioned the long term there. How do you keep that master plan on track? What makes you sure that you can kind of curate that over the longer term and as local conditions kind of change?
It's an absolutely top ambition for the council. We've got sort of unilateral support for it, and we're all working towards that. And I think that while we've got this vision, there's several different projects. We're not fixed on the order that they come forward in. We've got to be flexible to make sure that we deliver it, so we can take advantage of opportunities as they come up, whether that's a town deal, whether it's a levelling up fund. We sort of look at what we can bring forward, which sites people are interested in, and just keep plenty of activity ongoing with that long-term view. We embed it into our 30-year housing strategy as well, to make sure that we've got that ongoing residential ambition.
Thanks. Richard, what are you bringing to the party in Rotherham? How are you helping them keep that master plan on track and keep that long-term vision in focus?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think, from our perspective, I think from our perspective, it's been a really positive and successful partnership so far. Like Jane said, we're on site now delivering the schemes, but what's been probably encouraging and refreshing from our perspective is, as Jane mentioned there, the 3 sites we're delivering as standalone commercial developments from a private sector perspective are, there's no viability there. So the council have really taken some strong political leadership and taken the bull by the horn to show that these sites form part of a longer term vision for their town centre. So I think that leadership in its own right has been an absolute critical part of getting this up and running. And I think that's also led to some quite key decisions around design and things like that to be made. So Jay mentioned that we were involved very early in the process, helping to shape the design, the tenure mix, the property designs and things like that, but also looking at the overarching placemaking side of things as well. So one of the sites, Sheffield Road, which Jay mentioned there, the former swimming pool site, is adjacent the river, and it's bounded on one side by a commercial development and on the other side by a private sector surface car park. So if you were to look at it in isolation, you'd very much look at probably creating some form of gated community and maximising the inward value. But what doing that would have done is almost closed it off to the wider master plan. So we worked with the council to really make sure that site wasn't just seen as an island site in isolation. It could be designed in such a way that can tie into the other sites as that come forward. So we brought in a really good team together around us, design team, including Bon Bryan, architects who supported us with that. And so we were able to really work strategically with the council to make those sorts of decisions quite early on. I think the other thing that we brought to the table in getting involved early as well was really understanding the technical challenges associated with these sites, because all 3 sites that there's, if there's an issue to be found, these sites have got them, whether it's flood risk, contamination, levels. There's a couple of sites that are more suited to ski slopes, in fairness, but they're absolutely important things in terms of driving that value into town centre, into the overall town centre regeneration. So we were able to get under the skin of those issues very early on and come up with mitigation strategies around all of those. And then as well as the design and technical side of things, we're also working with the council on the sales and marketing aspect for the outright sale and the shared ownership unit. So providing our sort of private sector expertise in that front and looking at how we can tie that overall messaging into the wider town centre master plan. So it's not just a case of selling homes, it's about how the housing development is the enabling part of the overall town centre master plan. So we're creating that theme of destination and really creating an attractive place to come and live. And looking beyond just the residential, like Jay mentioned there, there's leisure coming to the town centre, the green space, opening up the riverfront, all these things which are all about placemaking. And we've really tried to support that message where we can.
There's an interesting point there, isn't there? And Barbara, we've spoken about this before. There's this idea of the disruption generally in all sorts of different ways, but there's some new ways of looking at how we work with companies. And if you've got a construction company that's willing to help in some of these matters, its main focus is getting on site, right? It wants to get on site and get delivering as quick as it possibly can. That presumably is an advantage to you as a client in terms of looking at things like the sales and marketing and the planning and so on, the aspects that you normally pay on a fee basis.
I think it's a huge offer. It's clearly quite new, but it is something I think that you're right. Lots of councils will be interested in. We all spend the most enormous amount of money on professional fees, right? We all do. We all hire multidisciplinary teams, and they're expensive, and they're good. And you still need, you need a lot of that. And, an amazing architect is something worth paying for. Solid engineering is something worth paying for. However, what Willmott Dixon are offering, I think, is a shift to the model. So instead of a fee-based company whose interest is in being paid for their fees, so, if you're there for a year before going on site, that's a year of fees, to a model which is, let's sort this out as quickly as possible, because our return comes from being on site. I think that is an incredibly different emphasis and interesting, and one I'm interested in discussing with Willmott Dixon. I mean, I think, you probably need, like all good development, bits of all of it. But that for me is a very new and refreshing model, and one I want to understand a little bit more, because you're right, getting on site and the time taken to get on site is the area we all want to condense a little. I probably think I'm safe in saying my whole development history, that is the bit that takes too long. Once you're on site, I kind of forget it. My eyes move elsewhere. It's that period to getting stuff on site. Can I also just say one thing about what Jane said in her town centre? Because I just think it's fabulous. That I just so want to support that thing about what councils do is take the risk and take the long-term view, and are the stewards of their areas. And so what she's described there in Middle of Rotherham is exactly where private developers won't go. Absolutely right. And it's the sort of thing the company can do as well. It's about holding long-term risk, and local authorities and wholly owned local authorities companies are the people who do that best. Long-term risk sits with those people, not with any private developer at all. So I just wanted to add that. I think that's a very strong point to be made around delivery.
Yeah, and David, you made a similar sort of point by implication when you were talking about the need to present Swindon to people arriving on that main road in a way that's attractive and desirable and gives the right impression. So presumably you see yourselves as the stewards of Swindon, and what sort of view are you taking over your town centre at the moment and the long-term kind of curation of its recovery?
Yes, and it was interesting listening to Jane, because Swindon's challenges are remarkably similar to those in Rotherham. We all know we've got to attract more people into town centres, and having them live there is one of the ways in which we can do that. One of Swindon's big challenges is our town centre land values, because they're very low. Developers can make good margins in places like Reading and Bristol because the land values are that much higher, and they can get their returns. And of course, we've also got a lot of office stock that's past its sell-by date as far as businesses are concerned, and it's being developed under permitted development rights into, in some cases, not very good quality and space standard housing. So those are two of the extra challenges I'd add to Jane's list. But yes, we need to get more people living, working and enjoying leisure time in town centres, and making them good places for the future.
All right, we're gonna pick up on that in future conversations, because it's that's a conversation that can go on for a long time. A lot of new initiatives coming forward from local authorities, but we're going to have to let you have the last word, David, because we've got to let our audience get off to lunch. or more likely to, your next Zoom call or Teams meeting. Before you go, viewers, please could you join me in thanking our panel today for sharing their insights and experience. It's been a real treat to spend the time with you, panel. Thank you, Barbara Brownlee from Westminster Builds, and thank you to Jane Davis from Rotherham Metropolitan Borough Council, and thank you to Councillor David Renard from Swindon Council and the LGA, and thank you, Richard Sterling of Willmott Dixon, both for your contribution to the conversation and for your sponsorship, which has made this event possible. Most of all, viewers, as ever, thank you for again tuning in, for gracing us with your attention and fueling the conversation with your stimulating questions. There are quite a few of those left over. We're going to do our best to circulate some responses to those after the event. But in the meantime, with best wishes for the upcoming Easter holiday from our fabulous panel, from the excellent Willmott Dixon, from me and from everyone at 3 Fox, good afternoon.